Hello everyone and welcome back to the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel. It's Hayden here again with another deck tech. This time, something a little bit shorter than my last video with Kano. This time I'm looking at a Hanabi Blaster Hyper-Driver Boost Aggro Dash deck. Now Dynasty is released in the past month and I've been playing quite a lot of Dynasty. I hadn't planned to play much in the month of December, but I've ended up playing quite a bit of Classic Constructed in particular now that Dynasty is released. It's a set that reminds me a lot of Crucible of War. There's so many different cards to explore and try, and you know, it's not a standalone set, it's not a draftable set. It's a set that I had planned to take a bit of time off before we got to sort of the ProQuest season and the start of 2023, but Dynasty's just got its hooks into me, and one here in particular that I've been looking quite a lot at is Dash. I've been playing quite a bit of Dash, going to some armories, playing a little bit in testing with my good friend Damakai, and working on a list that I feel is around a weapon I think is very strong in Hanabi Blaster, and I've been really enjoying it. So today I'm going to present that deck tech to you, go through everything from the main deck, talk a bit about some of my tips and tricks with playing this list, why I think it's so strong, as well as the sideboard sort of guide or sideboard options that I have available, main deck, sideboard, and also talk through some of the lines with this deck because it's quite an interesting aggro deck and it has quite a, I guess my philosophy with this deck is one that is a little bit maybe unique in the way that I approach it. So I'm going to go through what it looks like to play kind of the lines through a game with this deck. So why Dash? Well, I think Dash got a lot of upgrades, obviously, with Dynasty, but it's pretty interesting. The reason I think Dash is so strong is you can build it in so many different ways. You know, we've seen these heavy control, you know, pistol item, 6-item induction chamber, plasma purifier decks with defense reactions that don't really boost and don't really go aggro, to mid-range decks that can kind of do a bit of both with these high-octane combo packages in them with Tome Fiendal, all the way to these super aggressive decks that we saw sort of in the lead up to Pro Tour Lille. We saw Singapore won by an aggressive boost dash deck. And now with Dynasty, we've got even more tools for this boost archetype. Hyperdrivers in every color. You've even got this Nitro Mechanoid sort of combo-esque deck that you can play, or in-game deck. Now, the card that I focus the most on is Hanabi Blaster. I think it's one of the most powerful cards in Dynasty. It's one that I really wanted to build around, and I found that building into it, rather than just trying to take a pre-Dynasty Dash shell and plug Hanabi Blaster in, I think if you build around it, you can do so much more. And Dash is one of the hero, or the hero, that can put out the most raw damage in this game, combat damage in this game. You know, not talking about on-hit effects, obviously decks like Fire and Briar, they can get a lot of exponential damage through the game, especially with on-hit effects, things like Force of Nature, obviously things with like Salt the Wound, etc. with Fire, Mask Momentum. But pure damage, bang for your buck damage, Dash is the best hero out there, so have focused on this. Before we go ahead and jump into this core, I do just want to say, if you're enjoying the videos that we're putting out here at Arsenal Pass, please do go and support us, drop a like, drop a sub on the channel, and maybe even leave a comment and let us know about your thoughts on Dash for ProQuest Season 3. Is it a hero that you're looking to play? Is it a hero that you're worried about or thinking about how you're going to beat it during ProQuest Season 3 as well? If you are looking for a full sideboard guide and deck breakdown for this list that I'm talking about today, it is available over on the Arsenal Pass Patreon. With that said, let's get into taking a look at the core of this Dash deck. Okay, here laid out in front of me, I have the Core 60 Aggro Boost Hanabi shell that we use into a lot of matchups. This is the core deck. Then we have some sideboard options to change a few things, but this is what the Core 60 looks like. And now, usually with my decks, when I do these profiles, I'll break them out by the blues, the yellows, the reds, the resource cards, and then the power cards. Now, because this deck functions in, you know, quite a unique way to different decks with the boost mechanic and then plus some auxiliary cards, I wanted to break it out a little bit differently. So we do have 18 blues throughout this 60 card core. But on the left-hand side here, what I've done is pulled out all the cards that are non-boost attacks, basically. So these are all cards that are powerful cards. They're in the deck for a reason. They do specific jobs, which we'll get to. And then we have our equipment and starting items through here. We always start Hyperdriver in this 60-card core with Hanabi Blaster. Basically what it does is it allows us to play pitchless hands. With this and the Teklo Heart, if you start with one of these zero-cost boost cards, we have our zero-cost boost cards, our one-cost boost cards, our two-cost boost cards. Start with a zero-cost boost card. You get that Hyperdriver counter. You can then pump that into Teklo Foundry Heart. All of a sudden, you have 2 resources to be able to often pretty cleanly play out turns, pitchless, especially if you are defending with a card or 2, maybe ending with an item or one of these zero-cost cards are involved in the hand. So that's kind of what that looks like. So we'll go through, as I say, zero-cost, one-cost, 2 cards. I'm going to start over here on the left and talk about these power cards, though, because the first ones I want to talk about is these 6 blue items that we play. Now, these do function as blue resource cards, which are great, but because we are playing pitchless a lot of the time, I don't want to have too high a blue count, but these do double duty. Sometimes they are blue to play things like in maximum velocity, some of these 2-cost hands. Otherwise, they're just really powerful cards in their own right. Teklo Core is maybe the best card in the deck. It's pretty close to, alongside Hanabi Blaster. The card is really, really powerful. It enables us these maximum velocity turns. It enables us these big sort of 4-5 attack chain cards with playing one of these 2 costs or a couple of these 1 cost cards. And what these also do by pulling double duty on the resource side is that on turns where maybe you're defending, you're doing one of these setup turns, playing something like a Teklo Pounder is really, really strong. You can set up for future turns, especially into decks that might try and fatigue you. And then on turn 0 or even turn 1, you can just get free equity out of these items, which is really, really strong. You know, you start first, you go first. All of a sudden, you just play a Teklo Pounder, and that's 6 free damage you can get through the game on turn 0, which is fantastic. Spark of Genius, really, really strong card. I said Teklo Core might be the most powerful. Well, majority of the time, 80% of the time, if it's not on turn 0 or turn 1, or we're not trying to set up into a deck that's maybe trying to fatigue us or a bit more of a control deck, we're going to play the Spark of Genius for 0 to go and get a Teklo Core. And this pairs really nicely. I would say Achilles Accelerator. I'd say around 80-90% of the time in this 60 card core where we're playing this really heavy boost aggro deck, I'm cracking this Achilles Accelerator on the first Spark of Genius I play from a Teklo, getting a Teklo Core to continue momentum. Now, what this sort of hand looks like is you come in with maybe a 0 cost, which then procs your Hyperdriver. You then then play the Spark of Genius for 0, go and get a Teklo Core, draw your card, and then we break these Achilles Accelerator to gain that action point, because obviously Spark doesn't have go again. But we're drawing a card, we're getting more gas potentially, and we're continuing on with our turn. Now, the reason we do this is because sometimes your hands might be a little bit awkward. We might have sort of, maybe not all the attacks we need for a maximum velocity turn, or we want to turn basically the Spark of Genius into another card that can be an attacking card. So we'll go and break the Achilles Accelerator to go and get that action point back. We've basically played a Spark of Genius. It's replaced itself with a card we've drawn, and we've got 2 free resources for the next 2 turns, which is really, really strong. So otherwise, you're just playing the Spark at the end of the chain, drawing up the card, arseling it. But I would say around turn 0, turn 1, turn 1, turn 2, a lot of the time, I'm actually breaking this Achilles Accelerator and just keep going with the momentum that you gain off the Spark of Genius. 2 bias update. Reason for these, I played 3 for a while. I've played none in the deck. The card is solid. It's definitely not the best card we gained from Dynasty. I think that's Pulse Wave Harpoon and Hanabi Blaster. But BIOS Update does do a pretty good job. And if you ever do hit one of these items off the BIOS Update, and when you play 3 boost attacks on a chain plus the BIOS Update, if these are still in your deck, you're generally roughly around 40% to hit one of these items on that turn. And that can just be game breaking. It can just win you the game on the spot. You hit a Teklo Core on Teklo Pounder on turn 1. You hit a Teklo Core in the next 2 turns. You're playing your full hand pitchless. It can just be very, very strong. So sometimes it's not what you want to do. It has anti-synergy with Hanabi Blaster and maximum velocity. So cut down to 2 in this build. I'm still floating around on numbers I want to play. Maximum velocity, there's no reason to not play this card. It's 2 for 10. It's a 2-card 10 damage hand. Everyone's playing Wounded Bulls and Fendel's Fighting Spirit. Well, back when it came to Pro Tour 1 and I was looking at playing Dash and sort of started with this Dash boost sort of archetype, this is one of the best cards in the deck. And it still is. And I know a lot of people said, play Payload. It's, it's so much easier to play. Maximum Velocity is so hard to play. It's really not that hard to play, especially when you're playing Hyperdriver and you're playing Teklo Cores and you're playing this pitchless kind of build and you're playing all these 0 costs. Maximum Velocity is very easy to get off and it's super, super powerful. 2 cards for 10. You cannot go wrong. Just one of the best cards in the deck. Basically, all these cards on the left-hand side of the deck, these are the best cards in the deck. All these cards on the right are enablers and damage. Is kind of one way to look at it. Let's go and have a look at these cards. It's pretty easy. We can go through these pretty quickly. As I say, 0 cost boost cards, 1 cost boost cards, 2 cost boost cards. We'd love to have more zeros. There's just no more available. We're playing all 12 copies of the 0 cost boost cards, the 18, 9 T-Bones, 9 0 to 60s. So these are what help us do, Hyperdriver turns and play pitchless. Teklo Core also helps that, of course, and they help us cast maximum velocities. And then there's just some incremental value you can get off T-Bone turns where you just randomly have 2 T-Bones and you're playing into fire and you get one of their equipment early, things like that. T-Bone, yellow, blue T-Bones, they are the weakest attacks in the deck, but they do have a really important job with Hanabi Blaster and maximum velocity. And then our 1 costs, we just play all the good ones. Jumpstart is a really big gain from Dynasty. Yes, it's technically a 2 cost, but the way we're playing with this, and we'll get onto the crankshafts, it is almost always when you're playing this 60 card core a 1 cost, except for on the last turn of the game generally, and just avoid drawing a Jumpstart ideally. But yeah, Jumpstart is effectively pretty close to being always a 1 cost in this deck, which is really, really powerful. Another zipper hit, which is just one of the best attacks. And then we have yeah, these 2 costs, which you'll see are basically all crankshafts. Now, I'm currently on 8 crankshafts. I'm on 2 yellow, 3 blue, 3 red. I've been on 9. I've kind of flipped between, I think when I sort of ran it through Hyper-Aggro calculator, the 8 looked a little bit better from trying to avoid drawing these, but also trying to boost at least 1 during a game. Because, yeah, they're not the best attacks. 2 for 5, 2 for 4, they're pretty bad returns. Yellow definitely being the worst of that. So then we have this 1 throttle at the moment, but I have chopped and changed between just swapping these over effectively as what that looks like. So that is the 60 card core. You know, as I say, all these really just the engine of the deck, the boost cards over here, all of our payoff and sort of power cards left-hand side here. And then that does include the Hanabi Blaster, which obviously this whole right-hand side is helping us enable these big Hanabi Blaster turns. Now, what generally games look like when you're playing the 60 card core is they're generally 4 to 6 turn games, which I'll go into and break down the gameplay side of that. But we like to get 2 attacks off Hanabi Blaster, but because of the way we're playing with this deck, getting 1 attack is often just good enough. If we can get to 2 attacks, get to 4 counters, it is really powerful. And then obviously into longer games, decks that are maybe trying to grind us, and we're more setting up these bigger sort of push turns with Tickler Pounders, Tickler Cores, maximum velocity turns, then Hanabi Blaster, we can get, you know, quite a lot of value out of. One thing I want to point out with Hanabi Blaster is you can just stack the counters up. And one thing I recommend is that often with Hanabi Blaster, it's temptation. As soon as you get those 2 counters on there, remove it, attack with it. If the damage isn't going to be pushed through, or your opponent can sort of block it or block a lot of that attack for pretty good return. So, you know, they have 3 cards in hand, you've just come in with some 2 attacks or something, or some 1 attacks, and then you come with a Hanabi Blaster. If you think they're likely to block to get the value out of a 3 block in their hand, or even a defense reaction, probably just don't attack with an Hanabi Blaster. There'll be more opportunities later down in future turns because all these cards have boost. The only chain enders you have are Hanabi Blaster and the maximum velocity plus items. So you can just stack up the counters. This is a really good way to play into control decks as well. You know, think ultims, etc. You can stack the counters up to have, 4 or 5 counters, and then you can set up these more back-to-back turns so that you can run them out of having this Crown of Seas Arsenal card, keep them on the back foot, and just finish off with 2 or 3 really big turns by stacking counters on Hanabi Blaster, which I do recommend doing into those matchups. Equipment-wise, obviously we talked about the Hyperdriver starting item. Achilles Accelerator does have natural Arcane Barrier, but the biggest thing about this is we're using it with Spark of Genius turns to gain the tempo, or we're using it to play a maximum velocity plus a Hanabi Blaster attack turn to finish through lethal. Then we have the Tickler Foundry Heart, Crown of Providence, great for fixing hands, especially where we might draw 2 items. We can Arsenal 1, turn it into a more relevant card for the next turn. We can tuck away a maximum velocity in the late game when maybe we just can't play it anymore because we're too low on life. Or we can turn one of our extra blues, one of these 2 costs that we can't play, into something else. Goliath Gauntlet, you can play in the sideboard. I'll show you there's different equipment options. We do have the Dash Iron Rock Gauntlet, but you can, I think you just start with Goliath Gauntlet. We're an aggro deck, it just deals the most damage, and you have enough 2 costs, jump start of course counts, to just use this and just have more damage in the deck. Effectively what we're trying to do with this core of this deck is over the course of 5 to 6 turns, present 80 to 100 damage. That's what we're trying to output, just as much damage as possible and kill our opponent, but we'll get into what those turns can look like in a bit. That's the main deck. Let's go and check out the sideboard. If you've watched some of my other deck techs for various heroes across different formats, you'll know that I love focusing around one particular plan and making my deck super focused on being able to deliver that core package, that core plan, which is exactly what that 60 cards is that we just looked at. The best way to deliver the most damage across the fewest turns possible and really take advantage of cards like Maximum Velocity and Hanabi Blaster. Now, some matchups, we aren't going to be able to do that. We're going to face into fatigue. We're going to face matchups that are a little bit tougher, matchups that aren't going to allow us to play our 4 and 5 card hands regularly, and are going to demand sort of, defensive capabilities of us as well, or slower games. And this is where the sideboard comes into play. So in the middle here, first thing I want to talk about is we do have an induction chamber and a Tickler Plasma Pistol. Now, this is where we need to take care of things like dragons against Dromai, or where, again, our opponent's not going to let us get to that 3rd chain link to put counters on Hanabi Blaster. Think Icelander with, hypothermias and channel link fridges and all this disruption. That's where that sort of thing is coming in. We do also have access to more blues. So, where we are using our blues, think Tickler Pounder, Tickler Core, some matchups that are slower, those are going to not be used for pure resources. They are going to be probably all of those items, all 6 of them, and we're going to want to play them. So we do have extra blues, also allows us to play through ice a bit easier. And what we can even do against a deck like Ultim, maybe one that's trying to actively fatigue us, we can go up above 60 if we need to, and we can bring in some extra blues and some of these cards like Throttle that you can play off 2 cards and just better damage rate for the card, which is what you're looking for when you want to, when your density or your threat density is being threatened in terms of being reduced, you want to up it as much as possible by upping the damage per card, which 2 for 6 with boost, exactly what this can do. Other cards here that we have the Galvanic Bender. I was talking about, the Iron Rot for Dash. This is exactly what this is. Matchups where on hits are going to matter for you. Ninjas, Briar, for instance, I'm going to want to play Galvanic Bender, Viserai. Visitronic for mostly for Kano, to be honest, but also you can play this into Icelander, depending on which way you think they're going to try and play into you. Are they going to cut the attack actions, or are they going to keep them? I know there's a bit of a sort of divide amongst what people like to do, but you do have access to Visitronic for that matchup as well. And then we have these payloads and these throttles. Now, Throttle, I think you can easily bring into the matchups like Icelander and Lexi, Ultim, matchups that are going to be a bit more controlling, a bit more grindy, because the return rate on a single card is a lot better, which, going wide is harder against those decks. Payload can do the same. You can bring those in there. You can check those out for the maximum velocities. As much as I love maximum velocity, if you can't regularly cast that card, which you can't in certain matchups, it is worth taking it out. But these also double down as extra poppers for the Dromai matchup, which I really, really like. And there's spots in the sideboard right now because that 60 card core is so tight. And then High Octane, currently playing 1 High Octane. It's just really good against Icelander for clearing out, for playing around Hypothermia rather, giving you an option. You can actually just sit this in Arsenal, and you can also just have a big pistol turn at some point. So I like having access to at least one of these when I'm on a pistol plan, and I think you could potentially pay more, but so far I've just been happy with having 1 to 2. So that's the sideboard. I'm going to go on now and talk about some of how the games play out. This thing I talked about of a 5 to 6 turn of game you're looking at with the core, and I'm going to go through the lines each turn and what that can look like. This isn't something that I would usually do in one of these deck profile videos, but with this particular Dash deck, I think it's quite important to look at all the options that play out over the course of a 5 or 6 turn game, which is exactly what this deck is trying to do. Play a 5 or 6 turn game and present as much damage as possible. Now, there's a lot of different things that can happen on turn to turn, and I talked earlier about having an off turn, particularly probably at some point in the game, and I want to show you what those can look like as you go through this cycle of turns 0 to 6. The other thing as well is that this deck defends really well. It has a lot of 3 defense cards in it apart from those items, so when we are potentially in spots where we need to preserve life for the end game, we can defend, and this leads to a lot of decisions that this deck can have. I think when I look through this often, I look through the turn to turn structure, and I think there's a lot of decisions, and I think people play it quite simplistically and think, well, I just need to get through, as much damage as possible. But often the way to get more damage at the end of the game is actually to sacrifice a bit of damage at the current point in order to protect your life total, so that you can make sure that, for instance, you can get through to your second Hanabi Blaster attack, or you can make sure that this Tickler Pounder you're about to play will get the full value out of it. So these are all things I want to go through as we get into it. So let's just say, for instance, we're going second, so we don't have to worry about any potential turn 1 plays. We'll just pull out the hand here, and I'll just play face up so you can see it. So let's just say we're playing, I would generally think about a player, maybe he's just going to Arsenal pass, set up a 5-card hand against us. Otherwise, we could throw the 5 attack. But let's take a look at what we've got here. So here in front of us, we have we actually have the potential ability just to play off a full pitchless hand here, which is really exciting. So we have access to this T-Bone yellow, High Speed Impact red, and Zipper Hit red, plus this blue 0 to 60. And what we can do on our turn is we can have 2 resources. So let's just go ahead, play this T-Bone, boost it. We're going to gain ourselves a resource already, and then break the chain, Tickler Foundry Heart, get ourselves up to the perfect 2 resources, play out these next 2 attacks. We only need to boost one of them. We don't need to boost the last card on the chain because Hanabi Blaster only requires cards to say boost. They don't actually need to be boosted. There's our counter. So our first turn of the game there, we've presented 11 damage off 3 cards and got ourselves our all-important first counter on the Hanabi Blaster. More than happy with that. Take a look at our second turn. So now on our second turn, our opponent could very well come in and attack us, and we could have some decisions to make there. We've got one of the most important cards in form of Spark of Genius, but we also have this yellow T-Bone, which is underrated. It's a 2 attack for 0. We really want ours to be like 3s and 4s, for instance, yellow 0 to 60s, red 0 to 60s, ideally red zipper hits, things like this. But again, we could play another pitchless turn pretty easily here. And of course, we do have the 0-60. So there's a lot of different decisions that we could do here. Now, I talked about the Spark of Genius play and the line of Spark of Genius in my sort of guide before as I talk through the main deck. And this is what I would immediately look to do here, as I look to play the Spark of Genius to get Teklo and maybe find a better offensive card that can use our resources a bit better off the top. So I think the first thing I would look at is, well, okay, I know I've got one. I want to get to 3 attacks. I want to get this Hanabi Blaster counter here, and I want my attacks to do as much damage as possible. So the first thing is, well, Spark of Genius I'd like to keep. 0-60 is a decent keep. And then we could, you know, we've got this blue 0-60. We could keep this Zipper Hit. We could keep this T-Bone. Now, if we draw a 2-cost attack off the top of the deck, well, we wouldn't want to play the Zipper Hit because we'd want to be able to play the 2-cost. But we could then just Arsenal the Zipper Hit. So I would probably block with the T-Bone if our opponent, you know, is presenting attacks and allows us to. And even if we had to, we could also block with the Zipper Hit if they were presenting multiple attacks we needed to defend. This could be one of our off turns. Let's just say we did that. Because there is so many other lines here, right? With the Spark of Genius, we could actually, on this turn, we could theoretically pretty easily just decide to block out with these 2 cards here. On our turn, we could play the 0-60, boost it, get our resource, pitch the Zipper Hit, play the Spark of Genius, and go and get a Teklo Pounder, and be all okay just to set up for next turn, Arsenal the card we draw. But we're talking about trying to get the most damage out of sort of 0-6 turns like I talked about. We'll keep with this line. So on the turn, I would generally start with the 0-60. So we'll play the 0-60, we'll boost, we'll get ourselves that all-important resource. Then we'd break the chain to Spark to go to get the Teklo Core. And then we can go ahead and break the Achilles Accelerator to make sure that we have the action point. Of course, we're going to draw the card. Now, this is going to mean with the Teklo Core, this is really important. Teklo Core is one of the cards you want to make sure you get out during the game. It's going to allow us to potentially play pitchless or play a maximum velocity that we draw, and we're really set up to now push some damage without even really taking a turn off from presenting damage. So we can draw the card. Get in here. We see another Spark, which is not ideal, but actually what we can just do with this turn is we can do the setup turn we kind of just talked about and go and get a Teklo Pounder and kind of be in a pretty good position from this. This can be our off turn right here. So first of all, we play the 0-60 because we're going to draw a card, and then we could Spark with our 4 resources. Go and get ourselves a Teklo Pounder. Draw the card off the top. Maximum velocity puts us in a pretty good position here. And now we're pretty set up now, and we've had 2 turns in this game. Draw up a hand, and we see that we have Zipper Hit, T-Bone, and BIOS update. So we know that we need, if we want to play this hand, we'd need 4 resources to be able to maximum velocity next turn. While we have 2, 3, and we have access to the Teklo Foundry Hut, so we do have access to 4 resources, so we can easily play out this turn. So with this turn, we could block with the BIOS update if it demanded it, potentially some equipment if we needed to, or we could just keep this for pure damage on our turn. Let's just say we decide to defend with it for whatever reason. Maybe we're stopping an on-hit effect, maybe with Teklo Heart, maybe we stop a snatch, for instance. Then on our turn, we're ready to go. Got those 2 resources, and we can just immediately start to get into it. Presenting 7 damage here. We'll get the trigger off this, back to 2 resources. Play the next Zipper Hit. Can even play the T-Bone on this chain. 2 more boosts. We hit a Crankshaft. If we did still have that Hyperdriver, of course, we get to keep it around for another turn, which would just be even more resources to probably finish the game on the next turn. Then we can Teklo Foundry Heart and break for the Goliath Gauntlet. Back to 2 resources. We do also get a counter on Hanabi Blaster, coming for max velocity. So on this turn, we're showing 12, 15, 25, 27 damage pretty easily right there, which is exactly the sort of things you want to do. And we've got our 2 counters on Hanabi Blaster ready to go for a future turn. Move on from there. And now we get towards, turn 4 of this game. A lot of information I just presented there. We went through 4 turns of gold fishing from effectively going second. So turn 1, turn 2. Turn 2 is our slight off turn, turn 3, turn 4. So you probably have 2 more turns of the game in which, you know, we're going to have Teklo Pounder around for at least one of those turns, which is really powerful. But we presented 43 damage offensively, 55 damage in total because we blocked with 4 cards over the turn. So we're on the kind of trajectory we need to be. I was probably a bit more defensive there than even you might need to be. We could have been a bit more greedy and presented probably up to 60 damage offensively through those 4 turns, which is exactly where we need to be. Like I said, 80 to 100 damage over 5 to 6 turns is exactly what you're looking for. So you can see the power of what you're trying to do there. And there's so many decisions to be made. Obviously, we're just goldfishing. We're playing solitaire there with an opponent set on the other side and attacking into us with this aggro core. And this is designed to play into other aggro decks and into decks that are less interactive. We're just trying to put out as much damage as possible, but sometimes that will require defending. But so many different lines that you can investigate. One thing I will say is that you're going to want to strategically defend, and especially with cards that are under 8. You saw me defend with a yellow T-Bone there. Now, if that's worth a Hanabi counter because it's our third attack, then it probably is worth keeping that card. But you got to think that Hanabi Blast is great. It's free. But every card that we use that's under 8 in order to get that counter on Hanabi Blaster, we're effectively losing damage from what we could have done if we just defended with it. So T-Bone, we attack for 2, could have defended for 3. We've just lost a point of value there. So these are the things that you want to think about. If you come in for a blue 0 to 60, a blue T-Bone, a yellow T-Bone, you've just lost 3 damage minimum of value just to get a counter on Hanabi Blaster. It's probably not worth it. So these are the things that need to be thought about with this deck. As I say, not super straightforward, but I think you get the reps in, and playing the 60 card aggro core, you can get really familiar with it quickly, and it is very, very powerful. All right, there you have it. That is my Hanabi Blaster Hyperdriver Boost Aggro Dash deck for this new Dynasty meta. Now, before we wrap up, I do want to just go over a few things around the strengths and weakness of this deck. Maybe help you understand why or why not to play this deck, or some of the ways that you could target this deck if you're worried about it coming into the ProQuest season. So some of the strengths of this deck, one thing I did talk a little bit about during the deck tech, but didn't really mention at the start, is the defensive value. Now, because you are taking one of these kind of off turns during the game, the defensive strength of this deck with a lot of 3 blocks outside of your items is really, really important. It's something that Dash does really well. Having that big 3 in the right-hand corner is really important. So you do have this ability to defend when you do draw awkward hands, or when you need to when the opponent presses you for so. The other thing is this deck can change the pace of the game. It can go all out like we talked about in the game in 3 or 4 turns. It can take a setup turn or a defensive turn off. It can also set up intentionally against decks that are trying to fatigue you or run you out of threats, where you might, rather than just come in with 12, 15 damage that's only going to leak a few points of damage, you can take turns, set up things like Ticklo Pounder, set up Ticklo Cores, maximum velocities, counters you on Hanabi Blaster, and go for these 2, 3 really big turns with this Blaster Hyperdriver Dash deck. The other thing as well, around when you talk about strengths with this, is just access to these really powerful items and these cards. Pulse Wave Harpoon is another one as well. I think the advent of Pulse Wave Harpoon with Dynasty is one of the strongest things you get. Having now disruptive elements in your deck, or having a card that can be disruptive, is so strong, and is going to help you, especially when you're being so aggressive and your opponent's trying to find pivot turns. Pulse Wave Harpoon is one of the most disruptive cards that you can have to stop a pivot turn. On the flip side of that, if you're looking for ways to target this, or reasons why maybe not to play this deck can be fatigued. Now, there's a difference between decks that will try to fatigue this and have a fatigue plan, or will just naturally try and fatigue, as opposed to decks that can actually fatigue this. Because you can change that pace, use your Hanabi Blaster, use your maximum velocity setup turns, use your Ticklo Pounders, your Ticklo Cores, push proper 30 damage turns fairly regularly, or a couple across the game. You can get through people just trying to fatigue you with their natural sort of cards in the deck. Maybe they've got a couple of 2 blocks, maybe they don't have that many defense reactions, maybe they don't have any disruptive elements. But on the flip side of that, when you run into something like an Ultim in particular that has the ability to disrupt, to actually, put you, Ice React you, to Crown of Seeds plus Rampart you, these are things that are going to, if they are trying to fatigue you and have the plan for it, they can do it. So it is something you need to be aware of. There's a bit of a plan in the sideboard, like I talked about during the sideboard. There are some cards you can bring in, but definitely if a deck is actively there with a plan, a proper sideboard to fatigue you, they can do it. If a deck is just trying to do it with their natural sort of 60 cards, it's really difficult for them to do so, and you can push through that. Other reasons I think this deck is, maybe you don't want to play this deck. I think the Icelander matchup is okay. It's not amazing. So if you really do expect Icelander and maybe Guardians to be really prevalent in your meta, Dash is not particularly a deck that I would look to play, especially also if Lexi is going to be there. Lexi is a really, really difficult matchup because of how much it can disrupt you with those ice effects, with hypothermias in the deck, with Channel Lake Fridges, all those arrow on-hit effects. It's a deck that pressures you and disrupts at the same time, which is not particularly good for Dash, because Dash doesn't want the games to go that way. You can swap to this Induction Chamber pistol plan in the sideboard, but ultimately you don't have many good ways to defend over rate. You have good ways to defend on rate, and you have some good equipment, but over rate to stop these turns and pivot the game is really, really hard. Once you start to have to play off 1-2 card hands, it becomes a lot more difficult because of the fact you can't leverage maximum velocity, you can't leverage, Pulse Wave Harpoon, all these really powerful cards that you have. Hanabi Blaster, which is obviously a cornerstone in this deck. The last thing as well is Arachne can be tough, I think. I haven't played that matchup a lot, but my experience so far with that matchup is that it can be tough, and it's one that you do need to have a pretty good plan into, because they can take away really key pieces. They can deck you out as well. So that's going to do it. That is my Dynasty Hanabi Blaster Hyperdriver Dash deck. Maybe someone can come up with a better name. Drop a name in the comments if you've got one. Let us know what you think of this deck tech. Will you be playing Dash in ProQuest Season 3? Are you worried about Dash in ProQuest Season 3? Or do you think that maybe you should just be on a completely different Dash deck to this and look at maybe something like a pistol plan? Anyway, until next time, see you in the next video.